Mr. Chairman, I want to first start by thanking you for not just holding this hearing, but for the focus of the Intelligence Committee's attention on this subject for quite a while. I've been on the committee now for 3 years, and what I'm about to say I didn't know before I had the benefit of the hearings that we have had, and that is that the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, will use any means, licit or illicit, to pursue their China First policy. And the question for us is whether we're willing or whether we're going to be collateral damage in all of that. And this isn't just a fight or a competition, let's use that language, a competition between two economies. It's a competition between democracy on the one hand and totalitarianism on the other. It doesn't have anything to do, as you said, with the decisions the Chinese people are making, but they are the decisions that the Chinese government has made, and increasingly in the last decade exported around the world. So we're facing the consequences of that all over the world. That creates a huge and heavy burden for us and for our democracy, I think, and calls into question some of the idiotic battles we've had around this place. Instead of being focused, our attention where it ought to be focused, calls into question whether or not we've done enough to work with our allies and other democracies around the world and other economies around the world who share similar equities to ours with respect to China, which the good news is almost every other economy and every other democracy in the world, not every one, but almost every one, shares those equities. And that's why, in the end, I'm optimistic. I think we can compete because I think we've got a much better system than they have when it's working properly and when it's working well. So I actually, in all of that, have a question. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Pottinger just because he's not here, and then anybody else who would want to answer it. If you disagree with anything I said, please feel free to do that. This is America. You can do that. We'd be happy to have it. But if you don't, I'd be curious what message you would like to send, to go back to the Chairman's initial question, to private equity firms in the United States, to their leadership, the leadership of venture capital firms and other investment firms that are investing in Chinese technology, imagining that somehow it's not dual-use technology, imagining that somehow the Communist Party isn't going to be the beneficiary of this, and telling themselves that that ROI that Bill talked about somehow is worth whatever the risks are. So why don't we start, Mr. Pottinger, with you?
Thanks, Senator. I think that the argument on returns on investment is rapidly evaporating. I mean, we saw the obliteration of close to $1 trillion in shareholder value just in the last several weeks, as Chinese stocks were systematically rectified by regulators in Beijing. And so that argument, I think, over time is going to atrophy. But what I would tell private equity investors, including venture capital investors, is that ultimately many of the technologies that they're investing in fact, arguably almost every successful Chinese tech company that exists today was seeded with Silicon Valley or other foreign venture capital money, as well as with Silicon Valley know-how. And we know that some of those companies have now applied their technology to some of the most nefarious human rights atrocities since the mid-20th century. So that is going to come back to haunt companies in reputationally, in ways that I think a lot of companies aren't yet prepared for.
Is there any? I've got 40 seconds left. I don't know if either of you would like to consume that.
I would just like to amplify Matt's message, and with the biggest, I would say, the most painful salt in the wound is when American investors invest in tech companies in China, where that technology was stolen from the U.S. in the first place, and then we are forced to buy that technology as consumers at the end of the day. So our fruits of our thoughts and our ideations and our technology is stolen, and then we're forced to purchase it back from the Communist Party of China, is the painful salt in the wound.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.